and I think we can do so again. I am absolutely committed to not raising a single tax on middle-class Americans, people making less than $250,000 a year. In fact, I have a very specific plan of $100 billion in tax cuts that would go to help people afford health care, security retirement plans, make it possible for people to get long-term care insurance and care for their parents and grandparents who they are trying to support, making college affordable, and so much else. Well, if you look at how we'd have to sequence that, we might not be able to do all of that at once. But if you go to my website, HillaryClinton.com, it is laid out there how I will pay for everything, because everything I have proposed, I have put in how I would pay for it.
An absolute commitment, no middle-class tax increases of any kind.
No, that's right. That is my commitment.
Senator Obama.
Did you take the same pledge?
Well, I not only have pledged not to raise their taxes, I've been the first candidate in this race to specifically say I would cut their taxes. And one of the centerpieces of my economic plan would be to say that we are going to offset the payroll tax, the most regressive of our taxes, so that families who are earning, who are middle income, individuals making $75,000 a year or less, that they would get a tax break so that families would see up to $1,000 worth of relief. Senior citizens who have earnings of less than $50,000 wouldn't have to pay income tax on their Social Security, and middle-class homeowners who currently don't itemize on their tax filings, they would be able to get a deduction the same way that wealthy individuals do. Now, here's the reason why that's important. We have seen wages and incomes flat or declining at a time when costs have gone up. And one of the things that we've learned from George Bush's economic policies, which John McCain now wants to follow, is that pain trickles up. And so partly because people have been strapped and have had a tough time making ends meet, we're now seeing a deteriorating housing market. That's also as a consequence of the lack of oversight and regulation of these banks and financial institutions that gave loans that they shouldn't have. And part of it has to do with the fact that you had $185 million by mortgage lenders spent on lobbyists and special interests who are writing these laws. So the rules in Washington, the tax code has been written on behalf of the well-connected. Our trade laws have, same thing has happened. And part of how we're going to be able to deliver on middle-class tax relief is to change how business is done in Washington, and that's been a central focus of our campaign.
Senator Obama, you both have now just taken this pledge on people under $250,000 and $250,000?
Well, it depends on how you calculate it, but it would be between $200,000 and $250,000.
All right. You have, however, said you would favor an increase in the capital gains tax. As a matter of fact, you said on CNBC, and I quote, "I certainly would not go above what existed under Bill Clinton, which was 28%. It's now 15%. That's almost a doubling if you went to 28%. But actually, Bill Clinton in 1997 signed legislation that dropped the capital gains tax to 20%.
Right.
And George Bush has taken it down to 15%. Right. And in each instance, when the rate dropped, revenues from the tax increased. The government took in more money. And in the 1980s, when the tax was increased to 28%, the revenues went down. So why raise it at all, especially given the fact that 100 million people in this country own stock and would be affected?
Well, Charlie, what I've said is that I would look at raising the capital gains tax for purposes of fairness. We saw an article today which showed that the top 50 hedge fund managers made $29 billion last year. $29 billion for 50 individuals. And part of what has happened is that those who are able to work the stock market and amass huge fortunes on capital gains are paying a lower tax rate than their secretaries. That's not fair. And what I want is not oppressive taxation. I want businesses to thrive, and I want people to be rewarded for their success. But what I also want to make sure is that our tax system is fair. And that we are able to finance health care for Americans who currently don't have it, and that we're able to invest in our infrastructure and invest in our schools. And you can't do that for free, and you can't take out a credit card from the Bank of China in the name of our children and our grandchildren, and then say that you're cutting taxes, which is essentially what John McCain has been talking about. And that is irresponsible. I believe in the principle that you pay as you go. And you don't propose tax cuts unless you are closing other tax breaks for individuals, and you don't increase spending unless you're eliminating some spending or you're finding some new revenue. That's how we got an additional $4 trillion worth of debt under George Bush. That is helping to undermine our economy, and it's going to change when I'm President of the United States.
But history shows that when you drop the capital gains tax, the revenues go up.
Well, that might happen, or it might not. It depends on what's happening on Wall Street and how business is going. I think the biggest problem that we've got on Wall Street right now is the fact that we've got a housing crisis that this president has not been attentive to, and that it took John McCain 3 tries before he got it right. And if we can stabilize that market and we can get credit flowing again, then I think we'll see stocks do well. And once again, I think we can generate the revenue that we need to run this government and hopefully to pay down some of this debt.
Senator Clinton.
Well, let me start by saying that I think we know that we've got to get back to an economy that works for everyone. The president has been very good for people who are doing well, and that's great. But it was better for our country when we had an economy that lifted everyone up at the same time. And we had that during the 1990s. 22.7 million new jobs, more people lifted out of poverty than at any time in our recent history. The typical family saw a $7,000 increase in income, and we have lost that. Now the typical family has lost at least $1,000. And the fact is that, I don't want to take one more penny of tax money from anybody. But what I want to do is make some smart investments. And I was the first to come out with a strategic energy fund where we need to be investing in clean renewable energy. And I think we could put 5 million Americans to work. I think we have to invest in our infrastructure. That also will get the economy moving again. And I believe we could put about 3 million people to work, and good union jobs where people get a good wage with a good set of benefits that can support a middle-class family with a rising standard of living. I want to see us actually tackle the housing crisis, something I've been talking about for over a year. If I had been president a year ago, I believe we would have begun to avoid some of the worst of the mortgage and credit crisis, because we would have started much earlier than we have. In fact, I don't think we've really done very much at all yet in dealing with a way of freezing home foreclosures, of freezing interest rates, getting money into communities to be able to withstand the problems that are caused by foreclosures. Governor Rendell's done a great job in Pennsylvania. He saw this coming. And unlike our current president, who either didn't know it or didn't care about it, he has really held the line. And Pennsylvania has been much less affected by home foreclosures. But the president hasn't done that. And what I have proposed would do that. So you've got to look at the entire economy. And from my perspective, yes, taxes is a piece of it, but you've got to figure out what is it we would invest in that would make us richer and safer and stronger tomorrow, which will be helping everybody. I'm
going to go to commercial break, but I just want to come back because one thing you said, and I want to be clear, the question was about capital gains tax. Would you say no, I'm not going to raise capital gains taxes? I
wouldn't raise it above the 20% if I raised it at all. I would not raise it above what it was during the Clinton administration.
If I raised it at all, would you propose a gain in an increase in the capital gains tax?
Charlie, I'm going to have to look and see what the revenue situation is. We now have the largest budget deficit we've ever had, $311 billion. We went from a $5.6 trillion projected surplus to what we have today, which is a $9 trillion debt. I don't want to raise taxes on anybody. I'm certainly against one of Senator Obama's ideas, which is to lift the cap on the payroll tax, because that would impose additional taxes on, people who are, educators here in the Philadelphia area or in the suburbs, police officers, firefighters and the like. So I think we have to be very careful about how we navigate this. So the 250,000 mark is where I am sure we're going. But beyond that, we're going to have to look and see where we are.
Very quickly, because I owe Senator Clinton time, but yeah, you want to respond?
Well, Charlie, I just have to respond real quickly to Senator Clinton's last comment. What I have proposed is that we raise the cap on the payroll